All right. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're very excited to be joined today by disability scholar and author Scot Danforth. Scott is a professor of disability studies at Chapman University in California and is the author of the recently published book, An Independent Man, Ed Roberts and the Fight for Disability Rights. For those of you who aren't familiar, Ed Roberts was a polio survivor, one of the country's foremost disability activists, and is sometimes referred to as the father of the independent living movement. Um, Scott, first of all, congratulations on this terrific book. Um, if you haven't already read this, I highly recommend you seek it out and give it a read. You can order it online from University of California Press. Alternatively, I always encourage people to check with their local independent bookstore. And even if they don't have it, you can oftentimes ask them to order it. So we always encourage people to support their local bookstore as well. Um, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, Ed Roberts was a major figure in the disability rights movement. But Scott, if I might ask, what drew you to Roberts as a subject for a major scholarly work like this?
Thanks for having me, Brian, and hello to everybody there. I'm happy to talk to you about Ed Roberts. Um, what drew me? I was interested in the disability rights movement and in specifically how it started. It's always some kind of artificial to pick a point in history and say this is where this all began because things begin in multiple places for multiple reasons at the same time. But in my research, I found a group of students at the University of California, Berkeley in 1969 who launched a protest against the California Department of Rehabilitation and Ed Roberts. That group was called the Rolling Quads. They were uh, wheelchair users. Some of them folks who had polio, and some of them had other kinds had spinal injuries from different accidents. And Ed was their leader, and that really turned into the beginning of his career and his work. And while doing that, I realized there was no biography. Here is this movement that changed America. It changed our country. And you probably agree with me. We have a ways to go, but we've come a long way already. And we really don't have uh, good books and movies and other kinds of media telling these stories. It's these things are not well known. And so I thought there's no book about Ed Roberts. I I think I'm going to try to do this.
Yeah,
I just
yeah.
sort of jumped in and started going, and before I knew it, there was no turning back.
Yeah, so I mean, there's so many great stories in this book. Maybe talk a little bit about how you went about doing research for this book.
So the first thing I had to do was meet with the members of Ed's family that were still alive at the time. Realize this is 8 years ago. It took me 8 years to write this book. Um, I met with his brother Mark, his younger brother Mark, and I met with his mom Zona. Zona just died a year ago. I think it was a year ago yesterday, and she lived to 105, if I have my math right. So she was in her late 90s when I met her. She was a force for the
Hmm.
movement, um, also. But and the research, a lot of time in archives, you know, going through dusty folders with papers in them, a lot of time, and a lot of time interviewing people. I interviewed dozens of people who worked with Ed, knew him, friends, family, colleagues. Um, it was a long, slow process, and unfortunately, there were many people I wanted to interview that had already passed away. Um,
Yeah.
but I reached as many sources as I could.
Yeah, you mentioned Ed's mother, Zona, and she's such a big figure in this book. Talk a little bit about her importance to Ed, and both personally and in terms of his evolving political awareness, and why you think her role looms so large in this story.
So, you have to think about the time period. Ed was a teenager when he got polio. He came home after 18 months in a couple of hospitals, and he was in an iron lung in the living room of the Roberts family. And this is late 1950s. And uh, his mother, Zona, realized that if she couldn't get Ed out of the house, she was going to be stuck there forever. She would be his caretaker. And she wanted a bigger life for herself too. She wanted to go to college. She wanted to work. There were lots of goals she had for herself, and she pushed him. She pushed him to go to high school at a time when people with significant disabilities often did not go to high school. They certainly weren't set up for him. Um, she pushed him all along the way, and she was the one. There's quite a few stories in the early part of the book that she had to learn how to fight for him, and then her learning to fight for him was how he learned how to fight.
Hmm.
So the first fight in the book was, and it's I know it's ludicrous, but his high school, he finished high school, and his high school would not allow him to graduate because he had not taken physical education and driver's education. And when
Hmm.
Zona pointed that out to the administrators, they stood by that rule and told him he should come back next year and take these two classes. And she was just flabbergasted. How can these professionals be so foolish? And she fought them. She took it to the school board, and she told me in an interview that she really wasn't a person who was comfortable with conflict. She
Hmm.
really wasn't somebody who knew how to stand up to people. And she was a small woman. She was a gentle person, and she learned how to fight, and Ed learned how to fight with her. And
Hmm.
he also learned that fighting was going to be necessary. If he was going to live a decent life, if he was going to open doors for himself, and very quickly he realized the doors he was opening for himself were not just for himself. He was going to open doors for many people, and that he was going to have to fight every day. And it essentially became a lifestyle.
Right. Yes, that's a great point. Um, what was it about Ed, do you think, that made him such an effective advocate for disability rights?
Oh boy. Um, Energy, enthusiasm, arrogance. There's a
Hmm.
reason the if you showed the cover of the book, it's a pink color that just kind of drills a hole right through your eyeballs. We picked that color on purpose because Ed's attitude. I think when he was in the hospital and he was laying on his back for 18 months and all the different therapies, all the different treatments, everything they were doing. They used all the Sister Kenny methods, and none of it did anything. It did nothing. He responded zero. And I think he realized that his life was just, it was already outrageous. It was already just something that other people couldn't even begin to understand. And so he really shot for a different kind of outrageous. He was going to be in your face. He was going to have fun doing it. Here was a guy who challenged people with a big grin on his face. He was having a blast. And he learned how to do that. He learned how to raise money. He learned how to push people and push buttons and get things done. But he did it with a kind of a grin. He did it knowing that this was a circus. It was a one-ring circus, and he was at the center of it. He loved
Hmm.
the attention, and he loved being the star.
Right. Um, yeah, there's this phrase, and you kind of touched on it earlier, but there's this really wonderful expressed point in your book where you say that, quote, disability exclusion was boring, a whispered violence operating at the dullest octave. And over in this book, I think you find that like some of the greatest barriers to securing independence for people with disabilities came not from people who were per se like rabidly opposed to disability rights, but from seemingly well-intentioned people, whether they were bureaucrats in the government or medical professionals. And I think, you know, it kind of it seemed to me like that underscored Ed Roberts why it was so, and others in the movement, why it was so important for people with disabilities to have a stake in the institutions that were responsible for delivering services and care to them. Um, just talk a little bit about that, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you've read enough, many of the tactics that Ed and his friends used were borrowed from the African American civil rights movement, the kind of civil disobedience tactics, strategies. But if you've read enough about the African American civil rights movement or watched movies, you realize, the racists, the governors of Alabama and Mississippi and the county sheriffs, these were brutal, violent people. Racism was very loud and explosive, but what Ed found was ableism was boring.
Hmm.
Ableism happened when very nice, decent people made very foolish mistakes to underestimate what was possible. Um, it happened. And maybe that's why we don't have movies. I don't know. Ableism is often bureaucratic, or it's professionals just having poor judgment, but it happens over and over and over and over. Um, and Ed learned that, but he learned how to manipulate. He learned how to play people. Often he would manipulate, and he even made speeches where he explained this. He would manipulate leaders, political leaders, once he saw that their eyes were full of pity, that they felt sorry for him, he knew he had them.
Hmm.
He knew he had them. He knew he could play them. And he did not apologize for using that pitiful condescension against someone in order to manipulate them.
Hmm.
Um, he said, if it gets us where we need to go, that's much better than losing to those people.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Um, you mentioned comparisons a little bit to, or talked about the civil rights movement. I think one of the things that really stands out in this book is that the disability rights movement didn't exist in isolation. And UC Berkeley was kind of a hotbed for emerging rights movements at the time. So how do these other rights movements, you in the book, you mentioned the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, LGBTQ rights, how do those other movements influence Ed Roberts and these disability rights activists, and also sort of intersect with that movement?
Yeah, I I ended up viewing the civil rights movement as sort of the grandfather of all of them,
Yeah.
and then later feminism and the women's rights, gay rights, and disability rights sort of followed in the path and borrowed the strategies. I mean, I'll give you an example. To Ed Roberts and his friends, they were housed on the campus at UC Berkeley in a hospital called Cowell Hospital. And so their dormitory was effectively a wing of a hospital. Um, and he and his friends, 1968, 1969, they really reimagined themselves no longer as patients. They said everyone views us as a patient. They view us as sick.
Mm.
But what's getting in the way are the same kind of obstacles that Black Americans faced, that women faced, that gay people faced. They saw themselves as politically pushed to the sideline, and so the ideas they basically reinvented disability as a political idea, that we're not sitting on the sidelines because we're sick. We're pushed out and excluded because we're a minority group that people don't expect anything from, that they don't imagine what we can do. We're disrespected, we're disregarded. And so that reimagining of who they were gave them new actions. They weren't just trying to get better health care for themselves, they were trying to get everything. Employment, they wanted access to uh, the streets, the sidewalks, the movie theaters. They wanted to be in on American life.
Yeah. And you've mentioned the Rolling Quads, this group at Berkeley with Ed Roberts, and um, this is obviously a book about a single individual, but um, your book sort of makes clear that this movement was never just about one person. So, how did, I mean, you mentioned Judy Heumann, another polio survivor in the book, who was a big disability rights figure. Justin Dart was another polio survivor who was pivotal in the ADA getting passed. But talk a little bit more about how the movement as a whole, how community and collaboration helped move disability rights forward, and even there was conflict along the way as well. You mentioned Lex Frieden and how he had a different sort of model of going about advancing disability rights as opposed to maybe what Ed favored.
Yeah, we tend to view these various movements as everyone's on the same team and there's no internal conflict and there's no egos
Hmm.
and but really the problems of much of the story was in the 1970s, and the problems of American society showed up in the movement. I mean, there were racial divisions in the movement. It was dominated by there was um, sex, gender divisions. It was dominated by white men. Um, I know there were more than one person activist that I met with in Berkeley who said that there's a story in Berkeley that it's women that made the movement. And really, in a way, Ed and some of the other folks who led the movement tended to be men, and often in the background, the people on the typewriters and on the telephones and making the arrangements and making things happen were women. And that was how, I think it's how many offices worked in 1970s, and it's how the disability rights movement worked to a great extent. Judy Heumann was unusual. And for any of you, if you've met Judy Heumann, I don't think she would mind me saying that she was one pushy person.
Hmm.
And she was smart and strategic and very assertive, and um, she made her way as a woman in the movement because of those qualities. But much of many of the problems of American society you can see in the movement. Now, I will say that they were aware of these things. Ed Roberts tried to work with African American disability rights leaders in Berkeley to try to expand and try to bring in a broader diversity racially into the movement. They especially, I will say, it was, you think of, for instance, the 504 sit-in in 1977 at the federal building in San Francisco. Now that was the planning was led by two women, Judy Heumann and Kitty Cohn, working out of Berkeley. But their big outreach, they made outreach to the black community. They worked with the Black Panthers. They worked with the gay community, gay activists in the San Francisco area. They also made sure to reach out to different disability groups because historically the different groups have been in different clubs. The blind people were over here, the deaf people were over here, people with developmental disabilities over there. for many of them to go to some of those rallies was the first time that they were at cross disability or multi disability meetings. I interviewed people who, I interviewed people who, when they went to some of the rallies, it was the first time they ever thought of themselves as having anything to do with people with these other kinds of disabilities. They just didn't view themselves that way. So
Mm.
even to mix many folks with many disabilities, which was necessary, it was necessary for the movement, and it was still necessary today, I think, to make progress. Um, and that was part of the diversity that they had to bring together, and that was a challenge.
Yeah, I think that's a great point and one that comes up over and over in the book. You mentioned the section 504 sit-in, and so there's certainly these landmark events and landmark victories along the way, like that, like the getting the ADA passed. Um, but one thing I think this book does a great job of is illustrating how the fight to secure disability rights has really been a decades-long struggle. um, and there's a series of battles that seem to be need to be waged over and over again, and that it's only partially complete. That in many ways we're that struggle continues. So what lessons from Ed's life and from this movement do you think are especially relevant today?
I think one frightening thing today is that if you think of certain landmarks that have been achieved, say Section 504, ADA, certain systems that are in place, vocational rehabilitation system, we have a special education system. There are laws and funding that are in place, and we felt like for a while that we can make them better. We should fund them better. We should improve them. Systems like Medicaid and Medicare should be improved. But in the current administration, we're seeing efforts to take these systems apart. And they're not doing it through legislature. They're not passing laws. I'll give an example, special education. They're not taking apart the special education law that requires schools to serve kids with disabilities. They're simply taking apart the offices in Washington that
Mm,
monitor these laws. So essentially, you have laws that no one is checking up on. It's like having
yeah,
signs on the highway with speed limits, but we're going to say we're no longer going to put the cops out there to enforce the law. So, but that's happening in multiple parts of the federal government. There's a peeling back of the effort to uphold what we've already won, and I think that's frightening. Um, I think Ed would be appalled, but in a certain sense, I don't think he would be. I don't think he would be surprised because unfortunately, one of the lessons he learned is the default. If you don't keep pressure on and if you don't keep pushing, the default is that things fall back. The default is that things revert. Um, one of his lessons was you fight every day, and even if you lose or if you win, you don't make much of it. You celebrate the win, but you have to go on the next day and fight again because you're going to have to fight to maintain that and expand it. And so I think he would feel really sad about what's happening right now and the way people with disabilities are being described by the current administration and what's happening to some of our great gains. But I think his lesson would be we knew we were going to have to keep fighting anyway. We knew this wasn't over.
yeah, yeah, I think that's very true. With that, I think I want to give people a chance maybe to ask some questions and see if people if you have a question, if you just want to raise your hand, and I'll try to call on you. Uh, we'll just go in a kind of
Right.
first come first
Okay.
served. Yep, go ahead. Yep. Uh, Diane, we got Diane Wall has a
Hi.
question. Diane, go ahead.
Thank you for writing this book. It's truly very apropos for the moment that we're living through right now. Ed gives us the courage that some days it's hard to get from this Section 504. That scares the hell out of me that they are really working to dismantle that, and just by non-funding it and having a particular state such as Texas really attacking it. And the ripple effects, like you said, civil rights, disability rights. Well, we're seeing the VA being attacked. A lot of disabled veterans are being affected because 504 is being attacked. So, what would you say Ed would say to us, little activists that we are on our little bridge brigades and things like that? What do you think he'd say?
Compliments in the question. I think one thing he would say is we need to talk to other people about it so they know it's happening. We need to let our friends know. I think a lot of this stuff happens. It doesn't. I guess it ends up in the news, but it ends up in very small print, I would say. Um, and I think it's because the way they're doing it, they're dismantling and not they're dismantling agencies. They're letting off, they're letting employees go who handle the jobs that makes things happen. They're doing this by hollowing out aspects of the federal government. This there's no big headlines that says Americans with Disabilities Act overturned. They're not doing it that way. They're eating things out from the inside in the most
Yeah,
monotonous way, but we need to tell our friends. We need to tell people to wake up and pay attention. It's when we're not looking, when we're not paying, when we're not really noticing that these things are happening. And these are scary. And even without this, let's just say we go back a few years, we still had a long way to go to get to where we need to be.
yeah.
And this is just making it worse.
But books like yours is helping this moment. So I thank you for
Thank you, Diane.
bringing it out into the open so that we actually have a topic that we can bring up with a friend over lunch and say, hey, I just read this book. And this book is reminding me because I just read about 504 being attacked in Texas or whatever. And then taking comments. People don't realize that the comment section of the government, you can leave comments to several departments, like the Department of Energy, even. Well, they very secretly took away the requirement that accessibility be considered when they build new buildings.
Right. Some of what happened is the federal government who is supposed to enforce the law is actually violating their own laws.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
That's what's happening. And I appreciate the idea that the book can help
Yeah.
uh urge and encourage some conversations.
Thank you.
Hopefully it can, and I hope that the book is a little more uplifting than the brief conversation you and I have just had,
Right.
because that's part of what I was shooting for. There have been some wonderful, wonderful, fascinating, brilliant, courageous people who took this country forward. And I loved learning about them and I loved writing about them. And hopefully people like reading about them.
Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Let's go to James. James had his hand raised for a while. James, go ahead.
I was just I appreciate what you're saying and what's happening to those agencies is what's happening just across the government in so many ways. But I was just the story going back to his graduation
of high school.
and the rather stunning response of the administration. Um, she took it to the school board, but you didn't say what happened at that point.
Ooh, you have to read the book. No, actually, so I will tell. Here, I'll tell you what happened. She was told that she had to go to the school board and had to make a special request for them to grant kind of an exception from the
Like,
graduation requirements. And in the book, I tell in much more depth, but she got there and the school board, she thought she was going to have to stand up in front of the microphone and argue with them, which to Zona was just overwhelming. The idea she would have to stand up in a building, in a room full of people at a microphone and argue with these educated professionals. She had her notes, she was ready, she was shaking, and before she could ever make her argument, they said, "Congratulations, Ed Roberts is graduating. He had wonderful grades. Hooray for you." And she just dropped her notes and flopped into her seat and cried.
Oh,
It's very, but she came home and Ed was back, he was basically living in their living room and he was there and she told him the story. And for Ed, it was, look what my mom did. Look what my mom did for me. I think it was pivotal for him.
Wow.
mm.
Thank you.
thanks, James. All right, Marcy.
Okay. The question that I have is I had a friend who's actually in the same hospital when I was in the hospital. She had polio and was totally paralyzed from her neck down. And she eventually went and worked at UC Berkeley with the disabled students. So I'm kind of wondering in your research if you ever came across her name. It was Susan O'Hare. And
Oh, yes. Oh, she's very well known.
okay, because I've always been looking for somebody who knew her because I knew her. We were in the
Yeah,
hospital. She was like maybe 7 years older than me, but
yeah.
and I got some documents from UC Berkeley and read up about her, and
Hmm.
I mean she was pretty amazing, and she did a lot of wonderful things as well. So that heartens me that you that
Yes, yes.
thank
She's
you.
very well known in that community,
Okay,
as one of the, when I said that there were women that made the movement, she was one of those people who did so much in Berkeley and probably receives very little. You know, Ed
right,
Roberts is getting accolades, and I don't think
yeah.
Susan did, but yes,
Well, there, I said her name and you said her name, so yay.
yes, hooray, hooray, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marcy. Let's go to Mona.
Yes, I think Marcy's question was really good. But what I want to know is how can we get in touch with all the people who have had polio? And you know, Professor Mike sent out a letter to some people, and he said there are 700,000 people, I would say in North America, who are
Mm,
still around with polio. We need to contact them. We need to be in touch with them. We're not going to go through your government or my government to find them. We have to find these people ourselves, and we have to tell them about post-polio. And even if they know about post-polio, we need to tell them how to deal with it. What are we as polio people going to do to contact these people? We have no doctors. I'm exaggerating. We have a few doctors who know about post-polio. But for 700,000 people, we don't have enough doctors. And there are doctors out there. And there are doctors out there who want to learn. I'm here in the most wonderful rehabilitation hospital here in Laval, Montreal, Quebec. And I'm here. This is my sixth week of of getting rehabilitation for a shoulder replacement. This is what we need. Okay, it's wonderful that I have that. But all of the people who have had polio, every single one of us need to be examined by a proper doctor and get proper rehabilitation for whatever their needs are. Also, these 700,000 people don't know that they have a problem with polio. And that's because it's never been advertised. It's never been promoted. We have lots of promotion about cancer, about different disabilities, about, accidents, all these things. They're all promoted. But polio, we need to get in touch with these people. I'm willing to try and find them. If you want to come and talk to me, I will figure a way out how to get in touch with people. We did it once. We did it with March of Dimes way back with President Roosevelt. I think 2026 is the year to get back to finding all these people. We need to help our fellow polios. And that's what I want to push. I want to push it today. Everyone needs the help that I'm getting. I have a new shoulder and I'm proud to have a new shoulder, but it takes work to get it. It took me up to 10 years to find someone who would do a proper job. And I'm here. I also need a second shoulder, and that's because I didn't know that using crutches for 60 years was going to change my life. We have people here in America, in Canada, in North America, who are doing things to their body that they don't know is detrimental. Let's get in touch with every single person. Call on me. I am willing to find a way. Thank you.
Thanks, Mona. That's a great point. There are many polio survivors out there who, um, you know, still don't know a whole lot about post-polio syndrome or don't know that these organizations exist. It's always been a challenge to try to reach out to everyone. And you make a good point. Like outside of the challenge of securing formal rights, there's still other challenges, and one of them is accessing knowledgeable health professionals. I think for a lot of people, especially people who live in rural areas, that can be still be a real challenge. Um, and I think there's unfortunately fewer and fewer physicians and other health professionals that have a good knowledge of post-polio syndrome. It's something that's foremost on our minds here at PHI, as we're always trying to educate new physicians, reach people out there who need information, need help. So that's a great point. Thank you. Yeah.
Too, if I can throw in 2 cents from my research, Brian, your
Yeah.
organization with Jenny Laurie was at the forefront of getting the medical professionals to pay attention to a series of symptoms in the 1980s
Yeah.
that people were ignoring because they said, well, the polio virus was years ago. How could the bell ring on later with new symptoms? And so actually your organization and Jenny Laurie were at the forefront of some early conferences and early uh, uh, communications about post-polio.
Yeah, and even I was pleased to see him made an appearance in your book. He mentioned
Yeah.
Jenny and the letter by Larry Schneider that appeared in the Rehabilitation Gazette, which is one of our legacy publications. And yeah, like you said, we organized a series of conferences in Chicago and St. Louis starting in the early 80s to help bring together polio survivors and health professionals who were interested in treating polio survivors. So. Yeah, but education's always a battle, a continuing struggle that we are constantly waging. So we're doing our best, and if anyone can help get the word out there, if you know polio survivors that could benefit from our services, direct them to us, or if they're up in Canada or in Quebec, there's some great organizations up there as well. So let's see. Let's see. Does anyone else have any comments? Let me ask you, Scott, because I'm kind of curious myself, just was as you got into the research, was there anything that sort of surprised you or changed your view of Ed Roberts?
Surprised me. I realized a few things. I realized at one point that I had to show his weaknesses as well as his strengths. I
Mm,
had to show what he did wrong. I wasn't just going to write a hero's book. You can read it and say he was the hero, but he made a lot of mistakes. Um, and I try to show those in the book too, so you can see this is a real human being with flaws. Um, I think. What else would I say were surprises? The other thing for me was it's a challenge, and those who are looking at me through the screen may wonder, what's, am I a person? Am I a guy who has a disability? And I'm not. I'm a non-disabled guy. I do, so I was challenged at the beginning because I thought, gee, how can I write about him? How can I understand this, what he went through since I haven't gone through it? Um, and I'll say two things helped. One was, thankfully, and many of you probably know this, there's a lot of really good memoirs and biographies written by polio survivors and some tremendous writing. And I read and ate them up and really just loved reading those books. But then also in the middle of this, and this is personal, my 16-year-old son was diagnosed with autism in the middle of my research. And so here's my own son, who I'd always viewed as being quirky, anxious, a lot of other words I could say. And then suddenly the school district, said your kid has autism. And I go, oh wow, I have a son with a disability. This isn't was I what I thought I was doing for 16 years.
mm.
Um, and now, I'm it throws me in to being involved in autism parent groups and all kinds of now I'm dealing with the social service agencies here in California, the regional center, and these bureaucracies that are unbelievable. They mean well, but they're incredible. And just dealing with all of it from the other side, and I think that informed me. I can never say I write from the perspective of understanding firsthand what Ed went through, or anyone with polio went through. But I think that put me in touch with some perspectives that helped me to write.
Yeah, great. Um, okay. Maybe we can wrap it up there. Again, if you haven't read it, highly encourage you to go out, get the book. Oh, I do want to say you mentioned the cover. I think it's a really great cover and visually striking. I have three high school age daughters, and they all, when I was reading it at home, they're all like, "Oh, what are you reading? That looks really interesting," just from the cover alone, and like, so, yeah.
That's our demographic right there. We're going for the high school girl readership.
Um, but they're really interested in history, and so I was telling them a few stories from the book, and that they're like really interested in hearing about it.
Oh,
Um,
and I do want to say, just so you know, the at the very beginning, I kept telling my publisher, I kept pushing the publisher, we have to have an audio version. We can't put this out without an audio version. And of course, by the end, the publisher did not put out an audio version.
mm.
So I've arranged, it's in the works. That's the
Oh,
bottom
great.
line. I've arranged to get the rights to the audiobook back to myself. I working with a disabled man, a radio announcer from Berkeley,
Oh,
is working on doing the audiobook right now. He has a golden voice.
hmm.
Um, so hopefully within hopefully a couple months, the audiobook will be out. But that's in the works
Yeah,
for all
terrific.
those who want the audiobook.
Sounds good. Scott, again, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for lending us your time. Very informative, very entertaining. Again, the book is An Independent Man, Ed Roberts and the Fight for Disability Rights. Scott, thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everybody. Good to see you. Take care.
Yeah.